Hey guys, Metal Jesus here. Now the Nintendo 64 had about 300 games released for it, and out of those is a surprising number of awesome arcade racing games. So in this video I thought it might be kind of fun to show you some of my favorites and the ones I keep coming back to time and time again. Let's take a look. I'm going to go fairly quickly because there's a lot of them I want to talk about. And the first one is, well, it is Stunt Racer 64. Now what's cool is that this game is unlike any other racing game in this video. It has its own vibe, its own look. You'll notice here that it's a futuristic racing game, but the cars are all classics that have been retrofitted and upgraded. When you first start playing this game, you're going to notice that the physics are very slippery and you might find yourself struggling to win races. Well, you'll notice that there are coins all throughout these levels, and it's very important that you try to get as many of them as possible because that allows you to upgrade your car, which is key to winning races. And the game is called Stunt Racer for a reason, because you earn coins while doing stunts. It's all about winning races, but again, also trying to get as much coin as possible to upgrade your vehicle. And I definitely like the whimsical track design that they got going on here. It doesn't make a lick of sense and it doesn't really matter, but instead the levels are designed for big power slides, crazy stunts, and so much more. It's also worth noting that the game has a high-res graphics mode that you can toggle if you want. Makes the graphics look a little bit better and also puts the display into 16:9 for your modern TV. Now I guess this was originally a Blockbuster exclusive, meaning you had to rent it. This is back, in the late 90s and early 2000s, but that also means that it's a little bit difficult to find a really clean cartridge and even tougher to get the original box. So unfortunately, this game is a little bit collectible for that reason. Next up is a game I love playing on the N64. That, of course, is Cruis'n USA. So this was originally a really fun arcade game that got a port to the N64, and it's considered a classic. And like the name suggests, the premise here is that you are racing across the US from city to city, and what's cool is that it takes you on all these different sites, these different environments, these different levels. It's a pretty cool premise. However, one of the things you need to kind of get used to with this game is it has slightly twitchy controls, and you'll notice that immediately when you start playing this because the car seems to just dive to the left or to the right, and you have to kind of get used to it. But once you do, this is a very enjoyable racing game. The other thing I would mention is that unfortunately there are some problems with the frame rate, especially when things get busy in the levels. For instance, I'm thinking of near San Francisco, near the Redwoods. You can kind of see the frame rate starting to chug a little bit. And then they followed the game up with Cruis'n World. So the sequel actually takes you around the world, and then your goal is you're trying to get to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And what's nice is that it is an upgrade and better game than Cruis'n USA in pretty much every way. But I enjoy both racing games. They're a lot of fun. Next up on my list is Diddy Kong Racing. So this is a great racing game from Rare, and it's considered one of the best racing games on the platform. It's awesome. And being that this game is from Rare, they had a lot of cool characters for you to choose from, and the level design is just fantastic in this game. But for me, one of the things that always stood out in this game is that you can choose from racing as a car or as a plane or as a hovercraft. I thought that was really clever and just keeps the game fresh. And getting back to the level design, it's so interesting to see how each of these levels plays just slightly different depending on the type of vehicle that you're racing with. And the split-screen multiplayer is a ton of fun as well. It's a great game that I just keep coming back to time and time again. Next up is one of my favorite racing games on the N64, and I continually use footage in videos whenever I can because I just love an excuse to replay it. That, of course, is Beetle Adventure Racing. Now, what's surprising about this game is that it is a licensed Volkswagen Beetle game. It was actually created to celebrate the relaunch of the new Beetle just the year earlier from this, but yet it is so well made, it is excellent. And what it really reminds me of are those early Need for Speed games that had these really long tracks that had a lot of variety to them, were kind of in somewhat realistic locations, but really they were just all about fun. And what will keep you coming back to levels is trying to find all the shortcuts that will shave off just a couple seconds off your time. And so despite being a racing game where the only option you have is to use a Volkswagen Beetle, this is a highly regarded and fantastic racing game that is exclusive to the N64. Now, sadly, it never got a port to another system and it never got a sequel. But if you have an N64, you gotta check it out. Next up is another racing game made by Rare, and that, of course, is Mickey's Speedway USA. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's like, oh, yet another kart racing game. But keep in mind, again, this is made by Rare, who also made Diddy Kong Racing. And to be honest, this is one of the better ones on the system. And one of the surprising things about this game is how well it controls. It's a subtle thing and it's kind of hard to pick up on video, but when you play this game, you'll notice that they've tweaked the controls just slightly from Diddy Kong Racing, and I just think it just works perfectly. Also, the graphics are pretty good, and this game's running at a rock-solid frame rate, so there's very little slowdown. Now, the one thing I would say is that the starting amateur level of this game might be a little slow and easy for veterans of people who've played a lot of these type of games. Instead, go ahead and just skip over to intermediate. It speeds it up, and there's a little bit more challenge for you. Next up is Hydro Thunder. When I was coming up with my list of games to talk about in this video, I was a little apprehensive in talking about this game on the N64, not because it's not any good. It actually is a fantastic version of it. It's just that I prefer other versions to this one. For instance, the Dreamcast version that I have is just graphically superior than this. But ultimately, I decided to include it in here because the N64 version is really good. It's a fantastic version of this arcade classic. And then a funny thing happened as I was capturing the gameplay footage for this video is that I realized that the N64 version, even though it's running a little bit slower, doesn't have the high frame rate of the Dreamcast version, because this game is so difficult and challenging that it was kind of nice to have it slowed down a little bit. I was able to actually play it really well. So that was the reason why I decided to include it in this video. Again, it's a fantastic arcade racing game. I love the original, I love the Dreamcast version, and the N64 version is great too. Next up is a game called Revolt, and this is a game I have loved for an awful long time. I originally had it on the PC and then got it on the Dreamcast, and it's excellent on the N64 too. Now, the premise of this game is that you are a little remote control car, and because of this, the vehicle is very light and it turns just incredibly quick. And what's cool is that the levels kind of remind me of Micro Machines, where all the tracks are real environments like, say, a neighborhood or a grocery store or a museum. And like in other kart racing games, you have power-ups that you can pick up. Very important to do here. You're going to use them a lot. I noticed that the N64 version has a higher resolution setting as an option that you can choose, which is cool. It actually makes it look a little bit better, but again, the sacrifice is the frame rate, so not sure if you would want to use that or not. It's really kind of your preference. But the thing about Revolt that keeps me coming back to play it year after year is that it just has its own feel. You'll have to trust me on this. You have to check it out yourself because, again, being an RC car and the fact that it just turns on a dime and it's so light, plus the levels and the control method, it's just a great racing game, and I don't think it gets enough love. I remember the first time I saw the N64 console. I was visiting my mom. She had picked it up along with a handful of games, some classics in there, including Zelda Ocarina of Time, but it was Wave Race that blew me away. At the time, I was mostly a PC gamer, and we had nothing like this racing game. This game blew me away with its controls, with its water physics, with its speed, with its gameplay. It was fantastic, and it's still fantastic today. It's funny because you can complain about these graphics today and say how dated they are. It's the N64, these are early polygon games, but I was blown away while I was capturing the footage for this video playing these because I got to the third level where it's this kind of foggy marsh and you can't quite see very well, but then it slowly over the laps clears up and then you just get this serene kind of lake. It's still beautiful. I was blown away again. But then you get to the fourth track and it's completely different. It's stormy, it's choppy, the water's really rough, This game just continues to surprise you. It's a fantastic game. It's one of my all-time favorites, and I love playing it. I want to mention that there were a couple Top Gear games released on the N64. Now, I wasn't really a big fan of Top Gear Rally, the original, but the game that came after that, which was called Overdrive, actually is a pretty fun arcade racing game. Immediately, you're going to notice that this game is a little bit more realistic in its driving physics. The game supports a lot more power sliding around corners, and it's a lot of fun. And then there is Top Gear Rally 2, which I believe is a different developer than the one that made the original that wasn't very much fun. So this is the same developer that also made Overdrive, and you can immediately tell it's got a little bit more realistic vibe, but still doesn't sacrifice on the fun. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that these are my favorite racing games on the N64, but they are decent, and if you played all the others and you're looking for something new, yeah, check them out. You can't talk about racing games on the N64 without mentioning F-Zero X. Right off the bat, you'll notice this game is just blazingly fast. We're talking your eyes shoved back in your skull, you're going so fast in this game, and it feels so awesome. What's great about this game, and the reason why you don't get super frustrated with that speed, is because it has perfectly tight controls. I also like how this game feels fair, because if you don't come in first, it's usually because you didn't race that well, or you didn't know the track that well, or you didn't drive over all the boosts that you needed to. It's a tough game, but it rewards you for sticking with it and getting good. And speaking of fast racing games, we have Star Wars Episode 1 Pod Racer. This is based on a popular arcade racing game that got ported over to the N64 as well as the Dreamcast and PC, but again, the N64 version here is really good. And the sense of speed here is a little bit more manageable than, say, compared to F-Zero X, especially for beginners and on the early levels. One of my favorite aspects of this game is that each level is a different world and therefore a very different look and feel to it. And it just has a different feel to the game than, say, other racing games, because you're actually controlling the direction of those engines that are in front of your vehicle. So you're not actually controlling the vehicle itself, you're controlling the engine. It almost feels a little bit like a watercraft game in that regard. Like some of the other racing games in this video, I actually prefer the Dreamcast version over this one, but if you don't have a Dreamcast and you've just got an N64, this is a solid choice. And then I would probably get a ton of nasty comments if I didn't mention Mario Kart 64. Listen, this is a fan favorite for years now. It's often considered the #1 racing game on the platform, and who am I to argue? And the reason why I waited till the end of this video to mention this game is because so many of the other games I previously showed would be just overshadowed by this game. This is the game that everyone owned when they had an N64. We all play it, we all know the different levels. I mean, again, what can I say about Mario Kart 64 that hasn't been said before? It's still fun to play today, it's still a classic. Now, that said, I will admit that it is a little bit odd for me to come back and play this after playing so much of Mario Kart 8 on Switch. I'm actually used to the slight tweaks to the control method that Nintendo has made since the release of this game that kind of threw me off a little bit. They're similar enough where it doesn't really take that long to get used to it, you know, going back and playing Mario Kart 64. But for many gamers, this is where it all started. And again, if you have an N64 and you like racing games, you have to have this in your collection. All right, guys, let's a quick look at some of my favorite racing games on the N64. These are the games that I still love coming back to and playing time and time again, but I know that I haven't covered them all. You're actually seeing some of the honorable mentions here on the screen. And so I would love to know which ones I missed and which ones you love playing on the N64. Again, this was a console that was just excellent for racing games, and there were so many to choose from. All right, guys, well, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.